Hey, what's up? My sister texted me asking me how to make great chicken soup. So instead of texting her back naturally, I spent 4 days making this video to show her the best process I know for perfect chicken soup. For me, the most important thing about chicken soup is that you have a really rich, flavorful chicken broth. If you don't have that, it's pretty much game over. I've made a lot of stock in restaurants, and I think I've boiled it down to the 3 things you need to have perfect chicken broth. But I'm gonna be getting into that as we go here. First things first, perfect chicken soup, of course, is gonna start with perfect chicken. So to get started, I'm gonna grab a 3 to 4 pound whole chicken, and I'm gonna dry brine it. I'm gonna throw it into my medium stainless steel bowl, and into that I'm gonna measure 30 grams of salt, 5 grams of sugar, 5 grams of black pepper, 3 grams of garlic powder, and 5 grams of poultry seasoning. Once that's measured out, I'm gonna massage everything into the skin of this bird, making sure to get as much of this dry brine stuck to the outside as I can. At that point, I'm gonna transfer this over to a wire rack on a quarter sheet tray and let it cure in the fridge for as little as 2 hours and as many as 12 hours. I prefer to let mine go overnight because it gives me a perceivably juicier chicken overall. But with a long brine like this, remember, you're gonna have to be really careful in the end with the salt levels in the final soup. 12 hours later, I've got a really well seasoned bird. To do things right and not ruin it, I'm gonna preheat my oven to 300 degrees, load in the bird, and slow roast it for 2.5 hours. Okay, it's been 150 minutes and I'm gonna pull this bird out of the oven. Yes, this bird looks really good. I'm gonna check the temperature here real quick for good measure, but the slow and low method of chicken cookery is gonna go way over the prescribed 165, and you can see here that we're at 180 degrees in the breast, but it doesn't really matter. The flesh has held on to its moisture because high heat didn't squeeze it out, and the skin has been slowly rendering and basting chicken fat all over this meat for 2.5 hours. Okay, to make the broth of this soup supercharged with chicken flavor, like I said, we have the 3 ingredients that we're gonna get in there to get all that flavor. The first one here is chicken backs. I have 2 packages, or about 5 pounds here total. Chicken backs are cheap and pretty widely available. You just kind of gotta look for them in the corners of your grocery stores. In my case, this was 5 pounds for about $4 at the store. Next, I'm adding in some chicken feet. This is the second ingredient that we're adding to make super flavorful chicken broth. And yeah, I'll admit it, chicken feet are pretty gnarly looking. These things have toenails on them. These feet are gonna give a lot of gelatin and collagen into our stock, and it's gonna give it a nice, glossy, almost stick to your lips, meaty texture. I got these at the Asian supermarket by my house, and I had to buy more than I need for this recipe. I'm only putting about 1.5 pounds on this sheet tray. The rest of them are gonna go into a deli container, and then I'm gonna throw them in my freezer because it's gonna be a long winter where I live in the Northern Hemisphere, and I'm definitely gonna be souping a lot. Now, to bring out more chicken flavor in these bones, I'm gonna turn my oven up to 400 degrees and throw them into roast for 15 to 20 minutes. While those are roasting, I'm gonna pull the meat off the chicken we just roasted. It's been resting for 30 minutes and all the moisture is now stable in the meat at this point. When it comes to picking chicken, there's really no art and science. You're just pulling off chunks of meat and tearing them down a little bit. But make sure to treat yourself to a little chicken snack. That stuff's been perfectly roasted, it's still kind of warm, and there is no time like the present for a little chicken snack. Once all that meat's picked off the carcass, I'm gonna set that bowl aside, and then to actually make the broth, I'm gonna grab my Instant Pot. So the third thing that we need to make perfect chicken broth is gonna be the first thing into this Instant Pot, and that's these roasted chicken bones. Once those are in, I'm gonna grab a wooden spoon and I'm gonna scrape up all those fondy bits on the bottom of this sheet tray. And clearly doing it dry is the hard way, so I'm gonna add about a cup of water on there and use that to scrape things up. I'm gonna pour this delicious chickeny brown goop into the Instant Pot, and then I'm gonna pull the backs and feet out of the oven. As you can see, this wasn't a really hard roast. We just wanted to hit them with some dry heat for about 15 minutes to make them more flavorful and render out some of that excessive chicken fat. This is also gonna help us skip the step where you have to skim the stock when it comes up. In classic French cooking, you would do a lot of that with a ladle at the top as it's coming up to a boil because the stock gets scummy and all the impurities come out. When we roast it in the oven, you're kind of neutralizing that step and saving yourself some time. In the end, we're gonna have a much clearer, less gunky stock just because we put them in the oven for 15 minutes. Before these go in the pot, I'm gonna dump off all that excessive rendered fat, and then I'm gonna scoop them in. I'm gonna fill this Instant Pot with about 5 quarts of water total. This is enough water to cover the bones and to yield us enough finished stock for all that chicken we just picked. Once everything's in there, I'm gonna pop the lid on this Instant Pot, but make sure that the valve is set to open so that we can slow cook this for 6 hours. If you wanted to, you could go for as long as 10 or maybe 12 hours if you wanted to sleep or go to work in the middle of your soup making experience. totally up to you. You could also definitely use a stock pot if you don't have an Instant Pot. Oh yeah, and here's a quick detail. If you're gonna be refrigerating cooked shredded chicken, or really any meat for that matter, I like to put it in a container and press as much air out of it as you can, and then cover it with plastic wrap. When cooked meat is exposed to air, it gets oxidized really fast and takes on a real leftovers-y mineral flavor, and it really dries out. 6 hours later, I'm gonna come back and pop off the top of this Instant Pot, and this chicken stock looks so good. It's golden and it has an almost comic book yellow chicken color to it. You can already see that the feet have given us a really nice, rich body to the broth. It's not watery and thin like store-bought boxed stock can be. Okay, next I'm gonna strain this stock through my fine mesh strainer. This is called a chinois, but it's spelled weird. It kind of looks like shin noise, but this is my preferred strainer. It's pretty much standard hardware at the pro level, and I highly recommend you having one. Since this pot is really full, super hot, and kind of heavy, I'm gonna start by ladling it first through the strainer. And then I'm gonna try and figure out how to pour it off safely. And there we go. Since this is a 4-quart container and we have roughly 5 quarts of stock, I'm gonna strain the rest of it into my Dutch oven. There's a lot of chicken fat on top here, and before we simmer this down, we wanna remove that fat. I like to use my soup ladle to do that and just gently scoop it off the top. I'm gonna reserve some of this clean chicken fat, or schmaltz, for later on, and you're gonna see why in a few minutes. Once all that fat is strained off, we've got one more move to make this broth as chickenly as humanly possible. We're gonna concentrate it a bit by simmering it on medium heat and reducing it by about 25%. But don't boil it too hard. Any remaining fat or impurities in there will get emulsified into the stock and make it cloudy and kind of gross if it's ripping super hard at a boil for too long. While that stock reduces, I'm gonna take this chance to finish off the rest of my prep. For that, I'm gonna grab one large leek and cut it in half. As you can see, leeks get pretty dirty, and that's just from the way that they're grown. The way to mitigate that is to cut off the greens and the stem, and then cut it in half, and then take it over to the sink and just rinse out under those layers the best you can. From there, I'm gonna cut these halves in half one more time from top to bottom, and then I'm gonna cut these into 1/4-inch size pieces. This leek is gonna bring some mellow sweetness and some oniony aroma to the soup, but it's really subtle. I like it way more than just having boiled onions in my soups. We're looking for about 200 grams or 1.5 cups of leeks total. Okay, next is the carrots, and guess what? The B-boy got a new peeler finally. Thanks to my cousin Nicole, she sent me some of these super dope Japanese peelers. Oh wow. Effortless motion, like a machine, zipping off the peel. I'm peeling about 4 to 5 large carrots here, and then I'm gonna dice them into about medium-sized chunks. When I get to the thick end of this carrot where things get a little bit chunky, I'm gonna cut those in half like this, and then I'm gonna run my knife through them one more time. I'm gonna go ahead and cut the rest of these carrots up real quick, and since I think chicken soup needs a lot of carrots, we're gonna go with 400 grams of these total. Next up is gonna be celery, and that's pretty self-explanatory. I'm using about 6 ribs here total, and I'm gonna zip those down the middle and then cut them into chunks about the same size as the carrot. That's gonna be 300 grams total of celery, and we've got one more vegetable before we move on. I ran out to the garden to get this one. If you're wondering, this is fennel. And it's clearly just a flex. I wanted to show you guys that I could grow it, but I'm proud. Look at them, they're super pretty. I'm just gonna clean these up by ripping off all that dirty end, and then we're gonna cut them into roughly equal sized pieces, just like the celery and the carrot. We need about 200 grams of fennel total, and I'm just gonna scoop that into the bowl with everything else. And here we go. As you can see, everything here is a reasonable sized piece of food. They're all gonna fit on a spoon with each other. They're gonna get along, and if you're lucky, you can get some chicken on that spoon as well. Checking back on our broth, it's been about 25 minutes and it's reduced by about 20 to 25%. We're gonna strain it off one more time to get rid of any coagulated chicken gunk, and then return our Dutch oven to medium heat and wipe it out. Once that's reheated, I'm gonna take 2 tablespoons of that chicken fat from earlier, and I'm gonna heat that up. I'm going to add in all the vegetables and saute those over medium heat and hit them with 2 good pinches of salt and cook those off for about 4 to 5 minutes. Look, I think a lot of people here would just throw these vegetables right into that boiling broth and call it a day. But if you really want great, perfect, delicious chicken soup, you gotta sweat them off a little bit. We're evaporating some of the water out of those vegetables. We're also flavoring the chicken fat that's gonna sit on top of the soup. It's gonna taste like leeks and fennel, and you're gonna get a little taste, and it's gonna be totally sick. So we're gonna sweat them off. Any questions? Oh yeah, and I forgot, we're gonna be adding in 3 to 4 cloves of garlic here, and for the sake of ease, I'm just gonna smash them up and use my garlic press. And I'm not ashamed of it. I use a garlic press, whatever, dude. Once things are starting to get tender in the pot and the veggies have lost some of their water, we're gonna add in all that reduced chicken stock and bring it to a gentle simmer and cook everything till it's fully tender. While that's finishing off, we finally have to talk about the starchy part of this soup. You have 2 options basically as far as I see it. You can go with a chicken rice soup, great option, or a chicken noodle soup, also great option. Today, I'm gonna be going with a chicken rice soup because that's just what I prefer. And to do that, we're gonna take 300 grams of this Calrose rice. That's a medium grain rice that's really starchy and sits in our soup really well. On top of that, I'm gonna add 400 grams of cold tap water and 7 grams of salt. I'm gonna stir all that up to combine, pop it in my rice cooker, and call it a day. If you wanna make chicken noodle soup, follow all the steps for this recipe. Just add in cooked pasta at the end instead of rice. One last thing I wanna note here is that we are cooking the rice and or the pasta ahead of time and adding it in at the very, very end when we pour the soup. We're actually doing it in the bowl. That way we don't have mushy, overcooked rice and pasta absorbing all of the chicken broth that we spent all day and $12 making. Okay, one last prep item here is to break down the chicken we picked earlier. I want the size of this to be relatively similar to the chunks of vegetables in our soup. So to do that, just grab your knife, run it through once, rotate the whole thing 90 degrees, and then run it through 1 or 2 more times. Once that's chopped, I'm gonna add the chicken into the broth just as the vegetables are getting tender. I'm gonna stir all that up to combine and let that sit just for a second before we actually give it a taste. The chicken itself is really well seasoned and it's gonna give off some salt as it sits in the broth. So we wanna make sure that we're not going too far and over seasoning our salt. I've easily done that 3 or 4 times in the past and it's really hard to come back from. Okay, after giving this a taste, I feel comfortable with where it's at. I'm gonna add a little bit more salt and taste it again. It tastes so intensely chickeny, but it's still light and not dark and heavy. The leek and the fennel here brings some really nice round freshness. And of course, the celery and carrot are standard issue classic chicken soup stuff. Real quick, before we look at the finished bowl of soup, check this out. I cooled it off and the next day it became pure meaty jello. Thanks to those chicken feet, this broth is super rich, very, very flavorful, and wow, I mean, look at this. It shakes. Let's eat this thing. So that's the best chicken soup I know how to make. There's a lot of steps, yes, but it's worth it. Great chicken soup is part of a dignified life, you guys, and there's a long winter ahead, so be prepared. Let me know in the comments down below if you guys are for chicken rice or chicken noodle. As always, guys, thank you so much for your time and attention. Thank you for sticking around, and we'll see you next time. I got it. Slated it. I slated it.